Growing up in Strongsville, Ohio, Pat Chun often felt on the outside. An Asian American boy always recognized as Asian, but seldom as American.
And Karate Kid comes out, and then all of a sudden, your dad becomes Mr. Miyagi and everyone's waxing on, waxing off in front of you.
But there's nothing more all-American than sports.
And it's the one thing that regardless of what you look like, what you sound like, if you can play it, if you can talk it, it just connects you.
And he is certainly connected, distinguished and distinctive in the world of athletics. The first Asian American athletics director of a power conference program, first at Washington State, now at UW. But along with it, challenges he never saw coming.
It's the most pain that I've ever walked into.
And it's a success that his mother still can't quite appreciate.
There were 4 outcomes for me coming out of the womb: doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. So, I have 4. I'm still 4.
Success is messy, and this is what it looks like. Hit and Miss is about really successful people and their mistakes. You have to keep taking your best shot again and again, and it is going to be hit and miss. Hi, everybody. I'm Monique Ming Laven. Good to see you again for this Hit and Miss. When Pat Chun first became athletics director at Washington State in 2018, and then 6 years later at UW, there was one huge college sports fan I thought of, Earl Wong. He didn't go to school in Washington. He was a University of California Golden Bear, class of 1940, and he was my grandfather. Grandpa would have been rooting for Chun. He would have recognized the power of sports in Chun's life and how it could be a bridge between racial divides. And in 2018, when Chun became the first and only Asian American athletics director in a power conference, and the Washington Post wrote an article about it, Grandpa would have saved it. And the title was, "How Rare is Pat Chun's Path in College Sports?" You'd have to be an Asian American to understand this.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, that article is funny because at that point, I had already been an athletic director at Florida Atlantic University for 5.5 years. And my mom is, I would say, your stereotypical Korean mother who is a big part of her life is her church. And once that article made it into the ether of her church, she called me exuberant with pride. And I had to remind my mom, it's like, hey, I've been doing this for 5.5 years. But you're in the Washington Post now, so.
Chun had already been the athletics director at Florida Atlantic for almost 6 years.
That's something we take a lot of pride in.
And during that time, FAU student athletes set a school record for highest combined GPA, received the largest single donation in school history, and the football team had record success. His success was clear. But I get it. Well, Grandpa would have already known about Chun and admired him. That article would have validated his success to Ruby Wong, my grandmother, who had more than a touch of the famed Tiger Mom spirit that runs through so many Asian American maternal figures. A spirit that both motivates and irritates, and is also the love language of many immigrant parents.
I'm a first gen, both my parents came from South Korea. The older you get, you kind of have a better understanding of the sacrifices your parents make. Later in life, you learn, their American dream really was never meant for them. They come to this country to find a different future for their kids. My parents came here with 2 tools, an unquestionable work ethic and a belief in education. And that had kind of been 2 centering things for me in my career. But beyond that, though, it was always meant for their kids to go accomplish something. And, I'm fortunate to have parents that made that sacrifice.
What was it like for you growing up in Ohio as a Korean American?
80s was a different time.
Yes.
I joke around with my daughters, they couldn't survive just with just how the world was. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just, when you look different, I grew up in, essentially white, middle class, Catholic, Cleveland, Ohio, in the west side suburbs. Strongsville was a town I grew up in. In hindsight, it was, when you look different, when your parents talk different. My dad passed away. My mom still has, somewhat broken English even to this day, even though she's been in this country for over 50 years. Good, bad, or indifferent, it develops a toughness in you, that you probably don't recognize till later in life. I would also put, my parents were so focused on assimilating. They believe in America. They believe in the American dream. We didn't even speak Korean at home. They were so focused on learning English that we spoke English at home.
They were willing to take the licks of some racism and stereotyping as kind of the cost for entry for their children.
Yeah.
What was it like for you, though, who's going, you're an American kid, and your parents, and you, I'm sure sometimes, were seen as non-American.
Yeah. For my generation, when your parents come here, you know, they actually know who they are. You know, so for them to continue with their customs and their food and their language, it's who they are. Like, they weren't going to let whatever microaggressions or racism or, you know, bigotry they faced, it was never going to waver them from their goals. Different when you're a kid.
Yes.
Because you don't know who you are.
Right.
You don't know why you look different. You don't know why you're the only kid on the street where there's rice always cooking in the house. You know, so those are all the things as you grow up, you just have to, you go on, like, I think, you know, they're not no different than a lot of, you know, kids of immigrants. You go on this journey to try to figure out who you are and what your, you know, what your differences are in life. And, you know, that's, you know, probably always been in the back of my brain somewhere.
Honestly, it sounds familiar, that limbo, not casting off your family, but trying to shake off the stereotypes attached to race. My middle name, Ming, has several different meanings or versions, each with its own Chinese characters. Grandpa explained that to me as he drew the two that represent my version of the name. One is the character for sun, the other for moon, and together they mean brilliant. I still have that piece of paper. But when I was younger, the name was more problematic. It may have been linked to other Asian caricatures, like in 16 Candles.
What's happening, hot stuff?
Or Full Metal Jacket.
Me love you long time.
Or Karate Kid.
Wax on, wax off.
A whole slew of stereotypes. So even this fifth generation Chinese American can recognize the ambivalence of an immigrant's child who wants to be accepted but not pigeonholed. I'll make a bit of a confession to you. When I was growing up, so my full name is Monique Ming Laven. Okay. I just started using it as an adult, though, as Monique Laven when I was growing up. And people would tell me all the time, oh, I didn't know you were Asian.
Yeah.
And so there was something in me that denied it a little bit.
Yeah.
I was aware when I was passing and would embrace that sometimes.
Yeah.
Did you have that did you struggle the same way with your Korean identity versus an American identity?
Oh, absolutely. Like you just made me think of it. My dad taught Taekwondo. When I give the story of my upbringing, I tell my parents are stereotypes. You know, my dad taught Taekwondo. My mom still works in the grocery store in our hometown to this day. She's a cashier. In Korea, she was a classically trained pianist.
Wow.
At the highest levels, and gave that up, you know, to come to this country. She's been the cashier since. You know, your dad teaches Taekwondo, all your friends in school know that he does, and Karate Kid comes out.
Right,
you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, your dad becomes Mr. Miyagi, and everyone's waxing on, waxing off in front of you. Those are, you know, very, very impressionable parts of a young person's life, because you should be proud of who you are, you know, and you're, you know, essentially getting made fun of all the time. Now, the wonderful thing, though, in life is I get to see my daughters today that have an extraordinary amount of pride of what they're half Korean, and, you know, make fun of me because they feel like I'm a sellout compared to them because I don't embrace my Korean heritage that they do, and they love the food, they love learning more about it, they want to learn more about, you know, my wife does a wonderful job of making sure that they're aware of their heritage. Like, I go back to my hometown now, there's, you know, Korean fast food places around the corner from my mom lives. Like, when I was a kid in the 80s, I would have, like, one that wouldn't have happened to, I would have been like no way I'm eating there.
Right.
Yeah, but
You'd
now
head to
it's
McDonald's
yeah,
instead.
exactly.
Yeah,
but now it's, you know, now my girls love Korean food and they love talking about there's a pride in who they're at, and it's cool. Just so I think it's just the evolution of the world.
But before that evolution, long before his hometown had Korean restaurants, there was a path for a young Pat Chun to find acceptance, the obvious avenue for any boy in Strongsville, Ohio.
In Northeast Ohio, football is a part of your identity. I was just a kid that loved Ohio State football. I loved Cleveland Browns football, so you love playing football. Probably what's what drew me to sports initially as a kid.
Yeah.
Because it's a great connector. And it's the one thing that regardless of what you look like, what you sound like, if you can play it, if you can talk it, it just connects you with friends.
Sure.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest, you know, when I look back on my youth, it's, you know, and I enjoyed sports too, but it's probably one of the reasons why I gravitated to sports so much.
That gravitational pull could only really lead to one place for a kid like him, The Ohio State University. It was the double pulley that could lift up the education his parents so valued with the athletic tradition his friends revered. But there were bumps.
I actually took Korean at Ohio State.
Did you
Yeah,
really?
I took 4. I thought it was an easy A. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I thought because we spoke it enough at home, I could just go in, and once you're in college, it's like it's full immersion. I was like, wow, this is a huge mistake.
You said that your parents were kind of stereotypical
Yeah.
Korean, so I'm guessing they weren't full board like go into athletics then, Pat.
But it was always, it's the joke I always use, and this is really a reflection of my mom and dad, is there are 4 outcomes for me as coming out of the womb: doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. So, I have 4. I'm still 4. Like I'm not. Yeah. At least I have a couple news stories where the women at my mom's church can read that I've done something with my life. But if you were to go back to my youth, I checked the 4th box. Yeah.
So how did you convince them? Did you have to keep on trying to convince them until that article came out that I'm doing okay here?
If anything, I think I was fortunate because my mom really focused on being your best. And that was really something that was more important to her. Now, trust me, she'd rather me go to Harvard, Yale, and be a doctor or a lawyer.
Right,
yeah,
right.
That she was. But I think also when I reflect back, it was always more about being the best you're supposed to be.
He got his master's at Duquesne and then returned home to OSU to start his career. Over 15 years, he did just about everything: development, endowment building, strategic planning. But what he couldn't fully explain to his mom is what it meant to find your home in the OSU athletics department, one of the best funded, famous, and successful programs in the entire country, in the company of some of the top sports administrators, including legendary AD Gene Smith.
The blessing for me was that environment allowed so many people to pour into me. Like at the end of the day, I'm just, a son of 2 immigrants from South Korea.
Yeah.
Like the fact that no one looks like me you had all these great administrators, coaches, donors that fortunately for me saw something in me probably that I did not see in myself for a very long time. They were always willing to give me life advice, guidance, push me in the right direction, tell me what books I should be reading. It's really, I'm a product of that environment, but it's really all those great people. And to be in college athletics, to be surrounded by so many great coaches and watch how they operate and be brought under the hood of why they do things, has really set the foundation of my career. And then when Gene walked in the door a few years later, he actually challenged me to be an AD and put me under his wing and taught me the business.
He suggested that to you.
Oh yeah, he's the one that planted the seed inside me.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And you were kind of known as a rainmaker, right?
Yeah, I was having success in fundraising at that point. He'd actually only been there. Gene prides himself on his ability to read people, and it was really probably within the first couple months there as he's evaluating his staff. He asked me, what do you want to do with your career? And I actually told him I wanted to be an AD, but it was only because I'm the kiss up in me thought that's what he wanted to hear. But then he challenged me, and then he told me, basically said if I want to be mentored, if I want to be coached, he'd do that, but I need to listen to him. And that took me on a journey working for Gene that I could have never imagined.
That journey led all the way to becoming Executive Associate Athletics Director. Gene Smith and others had taken him under their wings, but eventually he had to spread his own.
I'd gotten myself to a place where I knew my goals personally were to be the best I'm supposed to be. And I knew that being at Ohio State, which was always home, I could never do that without getting outside of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And the only true growth can only happen once you get out of your comfort zone. So no matter how many times I would think even though I was promoted a lot and had done a lot of things, I was never really outside of my comfort zone. I joke around within our industry that Ohio State did little to nothing to prepare me for a mid-major job that is resource poor.
Right.
Now, the one thing that Ohio State did prepare me for, though, it's the old Woody Hayes saying, is you win with people. And how people are the heart and soul and the source of everything within an organization. So the nice thing for me, though, is allowed me to learn about the AD position. And, we had enough successes there at Florida Atlantic that got me to Pullman, of all places. And fast forward with there 6 years, proud of the relationships that you built there and the things we were able to do there. And that brought me here at the end of March.
January of 2018, Chun was hired as AD at Washington State. Now, weeks earlier, the Cougars had played in the Holiday Bowl. They lost to Michigan State, but quarterback Tyler Helinski threw for 272 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he was just a redshirt sophomore. He would never become a junior. Talking about Wazoo, right as you were going to be announced as the AD, horrible tragedy hit Washington State that you could not have seen, and that was Tyler Helinski taking his own life.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. I believe that happened right before you were going to be announced.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you find out? How did you decide to deal with that? That must have been tough.
Yeah. It'll. When I look back on my career, it's the most pain that I've ever walked into. Now, from an AD perspective, starting with tragedy is not anything anyone should want to do. You could see people in the realest light, and you could see the heart of Washington State just wrap itself around all the student athletes after that tragedy. There were hard days, weeks, months, and I was, I will be the first to admit I was not well versed in all the things that go in and around suicide, but also it forced all of us to take a look in the mirror to figure out what are we or aren't we doing in terms of mental health support. So it was probably, when you go back to learning, it was the best learning I've probably had to go through. It was heartbreaking to walk into, it was just heartbreaking, and there's just, it's the layers of that are lasting. Yeah.
He gives Coach Mike Leach a lot of credit for guiding the team through that tragedy. 2 years later, Leach left for Mississippi State. Big shoes to fill. Chun hired Nick Rolovich from the University of Hawaii. The very next season, he fired him. Talk about another challenge you couldn't have predicted, the pandemic. Then Rolovich won't get vaccinated. You let him go. And you were right in the middle of so much controversy, so much anger in the middle of the pandemic. Can you tell me what that was like to deal with that? Those are tough decisions to make.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to those times and where we were at, where the world was at, where the state was at. The one positive I always go to is it led Washington State down to the road to find Jake Dickert. And Jake is the perfect fit for Washington State, and to watch him, grow as a coach, to watch him develop that football program, it's going to be odd rooting against him one game a year this year, but it's, to me, it was always, as Washington State came out of that time, they ended up with a coach who's a perfect fit for Washington State.
You became a target, though, for people who were against the vaccination mandate. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if people transferred the anti-Chinese feeling to you.
Yeah, I mean, that was, there were a whole bunch of things going on in society with anti-Asian sentiment at that time, and it was probably, when I look, as you bring that up, and it was probably harder trying to explain things to my daughters because they would see things on TV that were anti-Asian. They would quickly shift not to me and my well-being, but to their grandmothers. Yeah, because she lives by herself. She's in Cleveland, Ohio, and trying to explain to them, because they've lived in a different world, different society, where them being Asian is more accepted, or is accepted, not even more accepted. And there was so much anti-Asian rhetoric in that moment, in that time, and just trying to explain to them where the world is at, why these things are being said, and and how we, what is the hope of going forward. But that's probably, when I look back on those times, that's what I think of.
He felt the pull back to Ohio. Spring of 2024, he knew it was time to spread his wings again. Chun's tenure at Wazoo was undeniably successful. Women's and men's basketball made the tournament. Football coach Jake Dickert led the Cougs to consecutive bowl games.
Touchdown, Washington State.
Fundraising almost tripled. But then in March, a stake through the heart, Chun left, not for OSU, but for rival UW. Cougs were stunned and angry, but Chun was surprised too. It wasn't his plan. He thought the time had come to return home to Ohio State, but the new university president didn't know him, and he went with someone else. You mentioned Gene Smith announced his retirement last year.
Yeah.
I imagine you perked up a little bit. What was it like not to get that job?
My wife reminds me that the good Lord has a plan for us. And, I've joked around with friends that I'll go back to my original plan in life and let the good Lord decide what we're supposed to be, not me.
It was part of reorienting himself away from the home where he was born and toward the one he built with his wife Natalie for their 3 daughters. Any mistakes you made as a father that you want to share?
Oh, tons, probably. A little bit, like I said, I blame my parents for a lot of things. Like
Don't we all?
when I first took my AD job, my first AD job, I was always of the mindset I'm doing this, for my family. Like, you're the first, you put all this stupid stuff in your head about you can't fail, and if you don't have success as an AD, it's gonna be a long time before another Asian American gets another one. So you have all this garbage in your head. And then it actually took a long time for me, and it was actually Natalie. I remember Natalie had an intervention with me one time, and she talked about how I'm bringing home too much stress, and like all the stress is impacting the relationship with my girls. But then I remember I was talking to a mentor one time, and he had said that when you take a job that's in a leadership role, he said the most important person in your world is your wife. He said, because when you go into that role, he's like, you're going to have instant friends, instant colleagues, and your wife's going to be sitting at home trying to figure out doctors and what day the garbage is supposed to go out, and she's going to actually be doing the real work and trying to figure stuff out on her own while you got people helping you. And I discounted it because I'm like, Keith, I care about my wife and kids, like that's not important to me. It took me forever to figure out that I'm not doing this job for them. Like, I get to do this job because of them. Because of all their sacrifices. And that shift took me forever to figure out.
His family is excited to be in Seattle. Their Pullman house sold in one day. The move was easy, the community welcoming. His girls love the city. And apparently the good Lord has a sense of humor. UW joined the Big Ten. So in the 2025 football season, he will be returning to OSU as a new rival. And just like when he was a kid, he may feel partly at home and partly like a visitor.
I told my daughters that when you look back in life, you're always better off going after things that challenge you the most and not getting them than not trying at all. And there's always lessons to be learned from that. And for us to have ended up here was really where we're supposed to be. And we've embraced that, and we're excited for what's around the corner for us here.
Thanks for watching Hit and Miss. You can find me, Monique Ming Laven, on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Links are all on KIRO7.com/hit and miss. And next time on Hit and Miss, Rick Steves like you've never heard before. Millions of people have read his guidebooks, watched his 12 seasons of Rick Steves Europe, gone on trips through his travel company. But he was not always an expert.
This is day 2 on our trip here, and we're already almost dead.
The journey filled with mistakes that made this former piano teacher the travel guru he is today.
As I was debating whether or not I should lose my marijuana virginity and get high in Afghanistan.
That's on the next Hit and Miss.